Welcome back everyone to this Let's Play of Kerbal Space Program Release 1.0. Now you may remember from the previous episode when we built this lovely launcher, and inside this egg-shaped fairing our colony command centre, that we were rather surprised we had such a high thrust-to-weight ratio. This really doesn't look like the sort of craft that would have such a giant thrust-to-weight ratio, and that's because it doesn't. That's because in a previous session I had changed the body for which Kerbal Engineer was computing thrust-to-weight ratio to the Mun. Now if I change that back to Kerbin and go back to the compact display, we can see we have a much more reasonable 1.58, so that's just a smidgen lower than the 1.6 that I would usually start such launches with. So with that corrected, we have a look at our values, and they are a little bit on the low side, but well, let's just go for it, shall we? I'd like a slightly higher thrust-to-weight ratio and a slightly higher delta V, but I think we should just have a go. Now, before we leave for the launch pad, there is one last thing I would like to do. Now, one of the things KOS doesn't do very well in this version is steer, particularly with gimbals gimbaling 100% of their total gimbal angle. That is a bit of a mouthful to say. So what I'm going to do is switch off the gimbaling for this central engine, so that when we get into orbit and we have discarded these orange tanks, this joint will be a very weak joint, so I don't want this thing flexing back and forth as we go through our manoeuvring. So I'll switch the gimbal off and we'll just rely on this advanced reaction wheel module to do our turning. So I think that's probably all the changes we want to make here. So let's save this and head on out to the launch pad. So for this mission we have Val and Bill. Bill needs a little bit of experience of space, as do some of the rest of us. So they are in the hot seats for this mission. So let's get KOS open, and we are going to run our usual initialization script. But I have made some changes to my ascent script. It now takes two arguments. The first is the target altitude, but the default is 100 kilometers indicated by an altitude of 0. It just saves me typing 100,000 all the time. And the second argument is the target inclination, which is 0 in this case. So let's run that script and let KOS go to work. So away from the tower we go. So some of the other minor changes I have made to this script is it now displays the target altitude in meters and the target inclination in degrees here at the top. We still have the current pitch, the calculated throttle, what's next? The actual controlled throttle, that can never get beyond 1. The target thrust-to-weight ratio and the actual thrust-to-weight ratio. Now, we are actually a little underpowered, so the throttle is going above maximum because it thinks it wants greater thrust. Physically it can't, it can only go to 100%. And it's overcompensated, and one of the things that PID controllers do is seek. So having overcompensated, it now has to seek back down. So we have gone over our target thrust-to-weight ratio considerably, but it is now coming down. You can see the calculated and controlled throttle are now 90% or 89% now, and the actual thrust-to-weight ratio is now coming down much closer to our target of 2. And you can see that reflected down here on the nav ball as the throttle is being reduced. So that's actually working quite well. So given that we were quite underpowered to start with, the PID controller did its best to control the throttle to what it thought would give us a thrust-to-weight ratio of 2. Unfortunately, that was too high. So it then had to seek back down again. It had to seek its way back down to a better setting, and it now has settled at around, well, 0.7. So we're coming down to about 0.7 now. Now, one of the only other features of PID controllers is they're best when seeking towards a steady state. And the one thing we don't have during an ascent is a steady state, because of course we're burning fuel, and as we burn fuel, our mass reduces, so our weight reduces, so our thrust to weight ratio changes, and so our PID controller has to keep seeking and setting the throttle. So it's actually doing a pretty good job. So let's allow Val just to enjoy the sight, although I say enjoying the sights. If we have a look at her view, she's just looking at the inside of the fairing, so not much for Val to see. So she's just going to have to wait until we deploy the fairing a little bit later. So we're now at our 30-degree final inclination to our launch angle. That's not our inclination of orbit, that's our launch flight path at 30%. When we reach that point, we will just set the throttle to maximum until our final apoapsis hits the target of 100. And there we go. So we are ready now to discard our fairing as we reach the top of the atmosphere. So there goes the fairing, and we can now use our circularization script to calculate a circular orbit for us. So let's just have a look and see how that's going. So if we just focus on Kerbin for a moment, we can see what trajectories is predicting as our entry into the atmosphere. Or not. No, we are now out of the atmosphere, and we can now begin aligning to our node. Now I like to do this manually, sort of to pre-align, because the KOS alignment function is very, very brutal. So when the node script runs, which executes a node, it tries to align, but aligns with maximum force, and so simply whizzes past the node and then adjusts back and forward and back and forward, and never actually ends up on the node by the time we want to execute our maneuver. So pre-aligning is probably a good idea. Now we're going to align at T minus 74, which is 1 minute and 14. So there we go. It's just done its auto alignment. You can just see the nav ball wobbling there just very slightly, and we will execute our node at T minus 14, so 14 seconds. So let's just switch off the lights and the gear and get out our panels. So let's extend our panels just to give us a little bit of electricity generation. And I'm also, I think, going to lock the gimbals on these orange tanks as well, because I don't want this vehicle flexing too much now that we're on the node. So we'll leave it just to the reaction wheel to make any adjustments. So 28 seconds, 14 seconds to go till we begin our burn of 1098 meters per second of delta V. So that'll use up the last of these orange tanks, which hopefully will be stage recovered. There we go. So we're about to jettison the orange tanks. There they go. You can see this rather rubbery docking port did flex somewhat, but it would be flexing a heck of a lot more if we had gimbaling on this engine. So a good thing we switched that off. So we're about a third of the way through our burn. So getting through to about half. Val and Bill should now have a view, somewhat of a view anyway. And there we go. Now we had 26 meters per second left, and we haven't got a particularly circular orbit. You can see our apoapsis is 117 and our periapsis is 85. So perhaps we could have done that manoeuvre manually a little bit better. But what the heck? We're here now, so I think it's about time we went out to map mode and planned our next manoeuvre. Okay, from map mode we need to find Minmus. Where's Minmus? Minmus is the second moon out. There we go. So it's over here on the right. If we plant it around here, and if we set it as a target, it'll help us set up our manoeuvre. Now we want to have Minmus at about 90 degrees, or about the 3 o'clock point, and so we want to start our manoeuvre, or set our manoeuvre around about here. So let's grab that and extend outwards. So extend past the orbit of the Mun and getting ourselves an encounter, which we don't want. So let's keep thrusting away. And there we go. So that should be about the right distance. We've got to get an apoapsis out of about 46,400. So that's 44. And we just saw our encounter pop in there. So that's an apoapsis out here of about 46,600, and we're a little bit high up. So you do remember that one of the features of Minmus is that it's on an inclined orbit. So we do have to make 2 manoeuvres, and it's more efficient to make your second manoeuvre out here than it is to make it around Kerbin. So let's just make the second manoeuvre and just see how we're doing. We can see our periapsis over here on the Minmus display, and it's 37 kilometers, which actually is pretty good. It's coming in at a pretty hefty angle, but I think what we'll do is we will execute our 2 maneuvers manually, and then we'll make any final adjustments that we need to as we approach Minmus, and I can almost guarantee we will have some. So our initial maneuver is 900 meters per second, so let's get ourselves aligned to our maneuver node. Let's swing ourselves around. There we go. Just pressing a little bit on the, I was going to say, the back button to soften our approach, which is something that the KOS alignment script doesn't do. So it doesn't vary the strength of its approach to maneuver node. So there we are, we're on the maneuver node. We have 8 minutes until we arrive at the maneuver node, so we can use the warp to maneuver node handle, and that'll give us a 3-minute margin to execute our node. So just see the time whizzing by down here. Time warp automatically dropping as we approach the 3-minute mark, and there we go, time warp is 1. So let's just readjust our maneuver, get ourselves closed right in. There we go. So we've got a 30-second burn, so we want to go on the 15. So let's just time warp forward until we get near 15 seconds. So we go 2 minutes and 1 minute. Bring time warp down with 30 seconds to go. So we've got 30 seconds to go. We're still drifted a little bit off. So we're going to go on the 15. Here it comes. There we go. So we're locked on our maneuver node. 900 meters per second to burn off, and we can see our orbit expanding below us. So we're about halfway through our burn. So I'm just going to reduce the throttle a little bit and just burn off that last amount of delta V very, very gently. There we go, just 50 to go. There's our encounter with the Mun. 10 meters per second left. There we go. So that's pretty close. We had 6 meters per second left. We're a little bit off. Our apoapsis is pretty good, to be honest. So let's just adjust this maneuver and see if we can bring ourselves back into a decent encounter. So let's just swing round and make use of our various handles. There we go. And there we are. We're back now in our encounter. And you can check the periapsis down here as well, about 100 kilometers. And do you know what? I think that's pretty good, because I want to put my space station at around 100 kilometers, only so that vehicles, as they leave the surface of Minmus and have to come into a rendezvous, have plenty of altitude to deal with, so that they can adjust the rate at which they approach. Now, the only thing I am looking at here, which I think might need a bit of adjustment, is our approach angle. So I'm wondering whether we can make a change to our approach angle in order to... Which way I've got to go? Got to go this way. Just to see if we can come in a little bit more on the level. So let's go right down to the smallest increments and see what sort of inclination. That's probably too much. So let's bring it back down. There we go. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I don't think we're going to do much better than that, particularly since we're going to be manually making our adjustments and manually making our various maneuvers. Now, this is only 19 meters per second, this second maneuver. So what I'm going to do is, although we're now on the dark side of Kerbin, you should just about be able to see our craft. Let's switch the lights on. You'll get a little bit better view there. We'll get some lights going there. Interestingly, the docking port has integrated lights. Excellent. Didn't know that. Thank you very much to USI, Umbra Space Incorporated, or Industries, Umbra Space Industries, for providing that. But what we're actually here for is to reduce the thrust limit on this rather large engine, because trying to dribble out 19 meters per second would be rather difficult. So let's now warp to this maneuver node. Again, we'll have a 3-minute margin. We're only warping at 100 at the moment due to our altitude. But if you click the warp to handle again, it will recalculate the maximum available time warp and speed you up, as in this case. So we can see the time to node dropping down here. We've got 3 minutes. There we go. It's just snapped over 3 minutes, so it didn't really calculate our warp to time very well. But it doesn't matter. This is a very approximate and a very small maneuver. So let us just gently bring ourselves in on this maneuver node, and then just gently dribble out our 19 meters per second. And you can see I've got a very, very tiny amount of throttle, and it's still coming down pretty sharpish, given the amount of delta V we actually have to run off. And if we look here, we can see the actual periapsis dropping according to our maneuver node. So we can see when that arrives at our target value, 440. As it just passed there, we come down to tiny amounts of delta V needing to be dribbled out now. And there we go. So let's kill the maneuver node, and I think we've dribbled out just a smidgen too much. Just an absolute smidgen too much. So let's go let's go and correct that, because we don't really want to be crashing into the surface. So let's add another maneuver node, and we only have to make a very, very, very slight adjustment to bring it back out. So let's see, we're going, there we go, 23 kilometers. So let's just bring this out. Oh, wrong way. Go up a increment. 46, 59. There we go. So let's just get ourselves, it's a 1.7 meter per second correction. Just gently bring ourselves round onto the maneuver node. And we'll warp to that maneuver node. So this is 3 hours to go, there's 1 hour to go. And there we come round to our 3-minute mark. This time it's calculated the 3-minute margin correctly. So it'll give us 3 minutes just to correct that slight problem with... you see, this is where these rather rubbery docking ports are not really helping. Lit up they may be, but they're making steering a little bit difficult. But that'll do just fine. We're on our we're roughly on the right trajectory now. We are just a smidgen off. Let's see if we can try pulling it to the retrograde marker, because this is mostly a retrograde burn. There we go. So although we've got 2 minutes to go, we're now pointing roughly in the right direction. So let's now just dribble out 1.1 meters per second. There we go. So that's that. So we've now got a periapsis of, there we go, 100. That's pretty good. That's probably as good as I could have expected. So we can now warp through to our sphere of influence change, which is just a smidgen beyond our apoapsis. So let's warp through to that. And we can see Minmus here swinging into view. So we're just a little bit before our sphere of influence change. We will change our stability assist setting down here in the autopilot. So it's not going to swing back round to retrograde just yet. We will need that for our retrograde burn to bring us into an orbit, but one thing at a time. So let's just time warp a little bit further forward until we come into Minmus's sphere of influence. There we go. So let us focus on Minmus. So let's focus on Minmus. That brings Minmus into the center of the display, and we're coming down a little bit, so this is going to be, well, quite a highly inclined arrival, but we will have to correct that a little bit later. So we're still time warping, so let's bring the time warp down. Shall we try adjust? That is quite a long way. Shall we try adjusting that now? So let's get a maneuver node way out here. Where can I grip this line? There we go. Why can I not grip this line? There we go. So let's add a maneuver there and see if we can bring ourselves down. There we go. Much more into the orbital plane. So we have less of a correction to do. That's a little bit too much. So let's use precise node to bring us back up. So we know that these... where we go? We got the Grumpf bug is going around in a roughly equatorial plane. So let's bring our periapsis up until we reach that point. So let's go up in steps of 1. Just checking this really by eye. And now 0.1s. There, that's a lot better. So that's another 7 meters per second. So let's just bring ourselves around to that point. So this is just going to bring up our periapsis before we do circularization, just so that we have... It's just to make it a little bit easier when we're doing rendezvous, that we know our inclination to Minmus is as close to equatorial as possible, as close to 0 as we can make it. Now we're facing in the right direction, so all we have to do now really is just burn to bring our periapsis down. So if I now just line up that grey orbit, you see we are still a little bit below with my calculation, but let's just point in roughly the right direction and just watch our periapsis come down until we hit, look at that, artificial, create an artificial horizon there, an artificial sunburst there over the horizon. But let's concentrate. We're bringing our periapsis down, just bringing it down nice and gently. Just want to kill the throttle as we reach, there we go. So just kill the throttle as we reach that crossing point, just so that we now know we have a roughly equatorial point at which to make our further adjustments. So let's just make a new maneuver node there and pull ourselves back. And here we go. So this is where we're going to make our adjustments. We want a periapsis of about 100. So let's just pull that out. There's 90 and 99, and there's 100. And I'd also like to correct that inclination, so that's probably going to change the periapsis I've just set. So there we go. That should be, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Let's just double check our figures down here. Our periapsis is now a little bit too high, so let's just bring it back. Let's get on the periapsis. Let's put our maneuver node exactly on the periapsis, and that gives us, let's just bring it down just a smidgen. Periapsis and apoapsis, just bring those down just a little bit. There we go, 100. So that's the maneuver we're going to execute now. So that will both correct our inclination and bring us into a pretty circular orbit. So let us align for that. That's in 2 hours and 12 minutes. It's 176 meters per second, and we have 400 left. So that's pretty good. We're going to have a little bit of delta V left over to deorbit our launch transfer stage. So let's just get ourselves positioned on the node, and then let's time warp forward. It's a 47 second burn. So 47-second burn, so we want to go on the 24. We want to start burning with 24 seconds to go. So we've got times 50 time warp. Let's just warp through to that maneuver node. There you can see us coming in here at the top left. Let's go up another tick on the time warp. So another hour and 50 minutes, so another tick. Let's not go in too fast. Come down a tick with 32 minutes left to go. So we're now going roughly a second a minute. 23, 22. So again, we're going on the 24. So let's just zoom in here and see our approach to the node. 9 minutes to go. 5 minutes, so let's come down another tick. And a tick again, so we're now going times 10. So let's come right down in time warp. And we are just off our maneuver node, so there we go. So we're going to go on the 24. So a few seconds left. And there we go. So we're now going to start thrusting towards our maneuver node. 150 meters per second to go. So let's have a zoom out and just see as our orbit starts to come in. So we're about a third of the way through the burn. About halfway now. So we've just gone past the maneuver node, so it's changed the maneuver node symbol. So that shows we've just passed it, and we are now captured. So now it's just a matter of completing the maneuver and getting our apoapsis and periapsis set as we want. So I'm just going to bleed off the last few meters of delta V until this gets down, until they basically swap over. There we go. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So if we now look at the orbit we're left with, it's still slightly inclined. The inclination is 4 degrees. And we also have an apoapsis and periapsis that are still a little bit off. Now what I'm going to do in order to fix that is I'm going to set the Grumpf bug lander as my target because I know that is roughly in an equatorial orbit, so let's set that as the target, and that gives us some ascending and descending nodes to play with to give us an idea of where to put our maneuver node. So let's use the descending node, and here we want to thrust upwards in order to rid ourselves, there we go, they swip round, to rid ourselves of our inclination. There we go, so those should now be roughly 0. And we can also look at adjusting our apoapsis and periapsis once we've done this maneuver. And again, this is just 5.8. I have still got my thrust limiting set, so I'll be able to easily dribble that out. So let's just warp round to this maneuver node. So there we go, we just see us coming round the blue orbit here, and this is actually demonstrating quite nicely why I have put the station in such a high orbit, because then the lander, for example, the Grumpf lander, could then have these much smaller orbits with much smaller orbital periods and therefore catch up the station in order to dock in far fewer orbits than might otherwise be necessary. So it just gives us a bit more flexibility on carrying out docking. Now this is a 1 second burn, so let's get ourselves lined up. There we go, so we're going to be pointing almost exactly north according to this, so let's get ourselves on the north of the nav ball. There we go. And then when we reach pretty much 0, we will just dribble off this little bit of delta V. So let's use time warp to bring us around. There's 2 minutes. And another tick of time warp brings us round to 1 minute. And there we go, 20 seconds. Let's just bring down time warp. And I'm just going to dribble this out. Now this isn't perfect because I know that the orbit of the Grumpf lander isn't perfect either. But we can see here our inclination changing as we execute this maneuver. And as long as it keeps going down, I will keep burning. So there we go, 2.4, 2.0, there we go, 1.5. So as long as this keeps coming down, I will keep burning. So 0.4, 3, 2, and now it's going back up again. So we're just past the point at which the inclination is starting to climb again. So that's pretty good. I like that. So let's get rid of that node. And now I think it's just a case of deciding whether we're going to change our apoapsis and periapsis. They are quite off at the moment. This one's pretty much on 99 dead, so let's just add a maneuver node here and bring down our apoapsis. There we go. I just saw it snap round there. So let's make sure this is parked right on the periapsis and just make a smidgen of a change in order to make them. There we go, 99. 99. My favourite confectioners, my favourite beach confectionery, a 99. So let's bring it. Let's bring ourselves around. Only 1.4 meters per second to burn off in this case. So let us bring ourselves round to our maneuver node. You see that flexing that we have in that joint. That is a little bit of problem for steering. But there we go. We can use the old time warp trick to lock the physics as we warp round to our node in 20 minutes. So let's get another couple of ticks onto time warp and come around to pretty much 0. So let's come all the way around. So there's 14. So around to 10 minutes now. 10. So not get too impatient. You see us closing in on retrograde. 3 minutes. Let's bring it down a tick as we go past 1 minute. And now as we get very, very close, let's just lock in on retrograde. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to watch this apoapsis, and we're just going to bring this down to 99. So let's just start thrusting just very, very slowly. 102, 101. There we go, just a smidgen more. There we are. Now, if you do it too much, as you can see here, the positions of the periapsis and apoapsis will start flexing with the slightest movement of your craft. So having them slightly off is actually a pretty good idea. Now we've got an inclination of 0.3 of a degree. That's pretty good. We have an apoapsis of 99, a periapsis of 99. That's pretty good by me, and we're currently 96 kilometers above the surface. Well, Bill and Valentina are now nicely in orbit, so let's just finish off by making some final adjustments to the orientation of the craft. So let's bring it round so the craft is facing where are we going? Let's have a look. So the craft is, oh I see, I've still got it set on retrograde, so let's put it back on stability assist. Get your foot off the controls, Valentina. I know you've got your feet up on the dashboard thinking this is all going to be done for you, but start concentrating. So let's bring this round. We're going to bring this round and park it in the north-south position. There we go. So let's bring it round to north. There we go. Still flexing just a little bit because this is the point of control. So this is just flexing back and forth on this rather rubbery docking port. So that's pretty good. We have our panels directed towards the sun. Let's have a look at the IVA view now that Val has. She seems quite happy with it. There we go. We have a view of Minmus, 96 kilometers below us. We have poor old Bill. Poor old Bill is just getting to see the back of Val's head. He doesn't really get anything to see or do, but he's getting experience, and that is the important thing. That is very important. So with that all said, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.